John Allspaw. Do you need an introduction?
I mean, sure. I think so. I'm not. I'm not Ashton Kutcher or anybody like super famous. So sure.
In a little circle of web ops nerds, you're a celebrity, probably.
Back at you, friend. Back at you.
We do what we can. We do what we must. So I've known you for what? We're going on, I'm going to say 14, 15 years at least.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
That's right.
And then we're both getting old, so there's that. But I feel like if you don't know John, he's been in and around doing all these things related to DevOps, related to SRE, all the early days, all the conversations. There's John Allspaw, and then now he's keynoting SRECon. So the story keeps going. Yeah. So for fun, what I want to start with is what I'm going to call buzzword salad Rorschach test. I'm going to say a word, or words, a little phrase, and then you're going to give just a short impression, and we'll go through those kind of rapid fire, and then we'll get into our conversation. So we'll start kind of easier or maybe harder depending on your perspective, and then we'll get to the fun ones at the end. All right, so agile. A sigh. We'll take the sigh.
Blues.
DevOps.
Rock.
You can give a little more than one word. Site reliability engineering.
Let's see. We'll keep going with that particular framing. Let's call it like a narrow like genre of metal.
Root cause.
Religion.
Observability.
Well-intentioned salad fuel.
Platform.
Fine.
Platform engineering.
Okay. Sure.
Resilience.
Adaptive capacity.
Resilience engineering.
Field and community. Working out what adaptive capacity is and how to support it.
Human factors.
Blues.
Cognitive systems engineering.
Heavy metal.
Is that like we'll do that?
Yeah.
That's the whole list. So thanks for subjecting yourself to my whims.
No, I love having to think on my feet. This is some good framing that I hadn't worked out. There's a I don't know if there was an expectation of being pejorative about agile, but I thought of blues because it's there's origins there, and the origins go in multiple different directions as far as to have the musical genre comparison, and same thing with human factors. That's what I would say. Had to come before the others. Yeah.
I have a mixed love, whatever other feeling relationship with some of these words. So
I'm sure you do. And isn't that the best part?
Oh yeah, I'm a human with some factors, so we'll do that.
Awesome.
So why don't we start talking a little bit about the kind of work that you're doing now? Maybe like a little bit of like how you got to where you're at, but then really like what's exciting to you about the kind of stuff you're working on now.
Yeah. Right. So in like a short nutshell, in or around the time that I met you,
You were deploying 10 times a day at Flickr.
actually, and like related to that, I just couldn't, I couldn't understand how is it that, we were, Flickr was like, when we were bought by Yahoo, we were like 25th of all the Yahoo properties, like at like the 25th most like trafficked, right? Property. And by property, I mean like sports and news and pets and finance. And then like within about less than a year or a little over a year, we were like fifth or like even like fourth or so. And that's if you include Yahoo Mail, right? So, and like our team wasn't very large, and like my group handled all the sort of the infrastructure stuff. And like I was like, well, wait, hold on a second. Like, yeah, we had some pretty epic outages and like incidents that we had to like work out. But when it came to like problem solving in like these uncertain situations, like multiple data centers, and like just the traffic and the volume was just absolutely nowhere near what we thought it would be, like something that you would hope for. But I was like, well, so what is it that makes people good at this, trying to understand all of this stuff? You can't see it. You can't see software. But you were like making inferences all the time. And like, what is it? Maybe it's, I got it. Maybe it's because I'm an amazing, one of the best managers ever. And that's what well, that's completely wrong, and actually very concerning if that was the case. Then I was like, oh, well, maybe it's like some sort of innate skill that people are born with, or and I just so happen to be lucky to have these people on the team. I was like, well, I don't know. So I kept asking these questions like, okay, well, there's got to be a world to figure this out. And I start reading about, what does what makes it so, like attention, where's attention? I had worked when I first got out of college at the Volpe National Transportation Systems Center, which is, is already, just with that, it's a government lab. And we did vehicle crash worthiness, and it was all about transportation. And I knew a woman who worked in cockpit human factors. And my undergraduate degree was mechanical engineering. I knew that in industrial engineering had always this like human factors. And like, okay, sure, I know a little bit about that. And I was like, oh, maybe I'll look there, because it's not like I can find it in like software journals or publications. And like, that's when I started reading and pulling threads. Something to like zoom forward. I'll tell you the one thing that happened, and it was November 2009. And Ben Black tweeted, "This is required reading," something like that, like period, and linked to a paper called "How Complex Systems Fail." And of course, I read it, and I'm like, oh my god, and like, it's now seen that this paper is now seen as like a gateway paper, right? Because it's so accessible, but also like gave words and like vocabulary and like described things that everybody, I think, in our world experienced. Like, oh, this person, is this person watching me? This is my life. These are all the things that I have to deal with, and like, these are all the various features and descriptions and characteristics about our work here. And the author of that was Richard Cook. I got him to submit it, and actually added some stuff into the web operations books of which you gave a chapter as well. And and you pull on things written by Richard Cook, and almost immediately you get to people like David Woods and Sidney Decker and Shauna Perry and Bob Weers and Bob Rethal, John Rethal, and a whole sort of community. And that's how that got there. And I was like, okay, well, what I realized was it's not just decisions and attention. There's a whole ocean. It's a little bit like, I went from the person who would be like naively, like if I wasn't in computers, like sometimes you'll say, I'm a software engineer, and you'll be, at a dinner party with somebody, and you're talking with somebody who's not in that world, and they'll say, oh, that's great. Hey, can you help me? I've got a problem with my printer. Can you just tell me? And you're like, oh, well, it's kind of not really, sort of, but not really the same. And so like, that's what it's like, whoa, hold on. Naturalistic decision making, cognitive systems engineering. These are communities that have sometimes fuzzy boundaries, sometimes clearer boundaries. And then sometimes it's not just topics, but it's also boundaries in time, much like sort of Agile and DevOps, SRE. Like these are overlapping. They have relationships across them. And so that exploration, I was done. Like it was, of course, like this is what I'm doing. And I was CTO at Etsy. I enrolled in the Lund program, which was absolute godsend and changed the direction of my career entirely. So I could get answers to those sort of questions. And when I left Etsy in 2017, Richard Cook, who I'd gotten really close with because we had worked together on putting together this consortium called the Snafu Catchers. He and Dave Woods had presented at Velocity and a couple of other places. And they called me up and said, all right, well, what are you going to do? And I said, well, after I take the summer off and like do nothing, I don't know what I'm going to do. And they said, well, do you want to try an experiment? Do you want to, maybe we could do.
We're forming a band.
And as I told John Willis once, I said, and I've said more than once, it doesn't matter if you're interested at all. If Jimi Hendrix calls you and says, would you like lessons? You only have one answer. And we continue to this day. Richard and I, to some extent, Dave was still professoring at Ohio State University at the Cognitive Systems Engineering Lab. He's emeritus now, but a good deal since the end of 2017. We were doing consulting and like working out. We knew that the world of software, number one, was interested in some of these unintuitive shifts in perspective about how things work. And so there's like little indicators that people, but we knew that we had an opportunity. And Richard and Dave had done similar things in medicine. They credited with, for the better or the worse, being at the origins of the patient safety movement and aviation. Woods started his career in nuclear power. And so they knew they had experience with bringing concepts and manifesting them in like concrete ways to other domains.
So with that as the backdrop, right? So you did this work in tech as a fairly, we'll say like standout contributor to some of these things, and then go and have this adventure with these what are researchers on some level, but have had impact in other industries. And then you spent, we'll say, the last 5-6 years bringing that back into the zeitgeist. And a number of people have now gone and done degrees at Lund, and some of these other people are in that same conversation. How much progress do you think we've made? And then when someone engages with you about these topics to try to bring something into their organization, what kind of experience and what kind of outcomes do you typically expect?
Yeah. So that's what an excellent question. And like, that's something that I learned immediately from Richard and Dave. I was all filled with energy when I left Etsy, and I was like, oh, I know exactly what we need to do, whatever. And then when we really started, like, people were like, okay, we're going to pay you some money. And like, I was like, okay, well, how about we do this? How about we do this? How about we do this? And Richard's like, yeah, no, we're not, that's not happening. We're not doing that. And I was like, what are you talking about? And he said, like, look,
Can you make that a little more concrete?
Yeah.
Like what kind of stuff did?
Because, look, I had just finished my degree, and I thought, okay, naively, maybe in order to do something tangible, to make what this research had told us, and what we know about learning from incidents and resilience and decision making, all that sort of stuff. Of course, it's dumb. You're not going to go let me put it this way. Richard just said, we don't do theory. We're not going to drop a stack of papers and just like, okay, here, read all of these PDFs and then come back to us. No, and it actually doesn't really, and now I understand and have a much better appreciation that you can help people, and they don't necessarily have to know where it came from. And so, that was a flip for me. And it's not that, so for example, incidents and learning from incidents is really the crux, but it's a little bit of a Trojan horse. That's the majority of we do a handful of things, but one of the more popular things that people ask us to help them with is how to learn more effectively from incidents. That necessarily involves doing incident analysis and coaching them through doing incident analysis in a way that doesn't look like anything else. It doesn't look like the conventional approaches that postmortems and post-incident activities look like. And so all those like coaching, and there's a couple of reasons for that, largely is because incidents tend to generate attention, right? And without that attention, there's not much motivation for you to do anything different than what you're already doing, which is totally reasonable. And so when we start working with the group, and I feel pretty confident, no group really understands and can describe what they're about to do and how their perspectives are going to change until after we're done. And we hear a lot of people like, oh, so FYI, at the very end, after we've done a project with them, like, okay, now I understand, but you would never have been able to describe abstractly what this was about. I only had like abstract ideas about it. All I knew is whatever we were doing, we knew that we could learn more effectively and learn about more effectively, and make use of these incidents. And so that's where we end up centering around that.
One simple question, and then a more complex one. The simple one is action research, part of your vernacular.
Mm-hmm.
That is, and then
Yep.
Two is, as you go into what you just described, do you see a fairly similar arc through that process that you're describing, or does it kind of start and end in different places depending on the organization?
Oh, yeah. Let me take that last one. Absolutely. There's a variety of different like results, like depending on the organization. There are some similar arcs, and in the way. So, for example, something that's quite common is part of incident analysis is data collection, right? And for the most part, like, oh, we're going to be opportunistic about data collection in or around the stuff that's relevant or germane to this particular incident that we're this case that we're looking at. And so we're going to get maybe we'll look at some code review comments and maybe some JIRA tickets and some past wiki, some emails, roadmap, that sort of, a little bit of, try to get a little bit of origins history. What's the history? Is this typical? Is it completely brand new, this behavior or whatever? But a significant bit of data collection is interviewing people who are either responded to an incident or who are notionally responsible for the stuff that's involved or in or around it. Engineers are terrible at this. And it's because the approach that leans a great deal on naturalistic decision making, critical decision method is the sort of the technical term for this sort of interviewing, is engineers always want to be, this is common across all of the projects and companies that we've worked with. Engineers in particular want to be helpful. When you're interviewing an incident responder, you don't want to help them. It's tough for engineers who are talking, even if they weren't, you're an interviewer, I'm an interviewer, you were at the, you responded to the incident, I'm an engineer, but I wasn't involved. If you're describing, I'm going to ask you open-ended questions. They're not going to be detailed because I want to get your picture of the situation. If you're pausing, so it was a little bit like, software engineers are very tough. Where it's like, oh, there's this thing where there's this thing where, the client talks to this thing. I can't remember what it's called. And then that thing talks to Postgres. And it's like, and of course you want to say connection pool or PG bouncer, something like that. That's not helpful in that situation, because you want them to understand, not because you declared it, but understand in the dialogue that they are the teacher and you are a student.
So there's a tendency to lead the witness. Is that kind of what the?
Yeah, but only because it's a bit core sometimes to engineers, to want to be helpful and talk about the nerdy stuff with that nerdy stuff. And so the most skilled interviewers want to understand what the process is not for the incident analyst to understand the incident. It's to understand how they understood the incident. And so that's an example of something that's quite common across all. Now, as far as if I zoom out, the type of in the long game, in the long run, are they able to do? Because you can have the most amazing incident analysis skills and still learn very little in various ways for various reasons. And so it really does run the gamut. Everything from a group was really making progress and things are starting to click and they're demonstrating to the rest of their colleagues what different looks like and whatever. And then CTO or VP, leaves and the replacement's like, I came from Amazon and we're doing correction of error, or I came from other place and I know exactly what to do here. And we're going to do this other thing. And it's pretty easy to just squash it. Anyway.
So one of the other things I have a love-hate relationship with is metrics. And
do tell.
I'm curious, in your kind of adventure, how much of this can be quantitative, or is it really qualitative?
Why not both? I think, right, so numbers can be descriptive. I would say that the experience, and Courtney Nash has done such, and some others have done such a very good job of demonstrating with real, concrete stuff about the dangers and the hazards of aggregate aggregating numbers to represent much more than they actually do, and taking it as for granted that they do, right? So rather than the length of an incident, which is very common, and is problematic in a whole bunch of ways. If you've not seen anything that Courtney has presented on, or read the Void Report, or anything that she's written in the past couple of years, then you're completely missing out. You absolutely should go do that. But instead, it doesn't, there's nothing wrong with numbers. In fact, numbers can help you explain quite a bit. The number of people who responded, the number of people who the responders needed to call for help, the tenure of the people responding to the incidents. You know, these are all numbers. You can put this together, but none of them by themselves draws any picture whatsoever. It's like saying, oh yeah, like, you know, heavy metal as a genre is a 6.34. I don't know. What is it? So
you just gave an example of a few numbers in my, you know, and I haven't really done a deep dive with some of the newer stuff you've been doing. Is there a template that you kind of would capture all these numbers, or would you?
No, and it's much easier. It's much easier than a template. The template, I think about it this way. I think the template is a little bit of as a, it's a model, right? The problem happens when the template is expected to be the thing and shoulder the burden. And there are a couple of ways that we sort of help clients sort of see this, but the fact of the matter is the people who respond to the incidents, the people who were at an organization when incidents in the past happened, sometimes, you know, they have stories. And something that always has never failed to absolutely amaze is we will ask in a new organization we have worked with, we'll ask people, hey, can you tell us a story that comes to mind about an incident? There's never been an engineer who says, oh, yeah, nothing really comes to mind. That's never. And they tell a story, and the story is amazing. It's always amazing. Sometimes people from aviation will say, how do you get software engineers to talk? And Richard would always like to respond with, like, I think the real question is how you get them to shut up. And so what they remember about an incident is the learning. That is the learning. And they may say, oh yeah, and this one, and then at that point, we couldn't understand why this thing that we tried wasn't fixing it. And we spent 6 hours, right? Every now and then some stories have a length of time as part of the narrative that they'll tell you. Others, they don't, because that's not the most important part of the story. And so it's the push or the desire for you know, an aggregate quantification, boil it down, aggregate, is largely for managers who are, or people who are more distant from the work. It's usually manifested in some sort of report that's on a cadence of a quarter, a month, or week, whatever, with the idea that it will somehow give you an aggregate view of something, which is a very reasonable thing to do, except the population of, you know, the stuff you would do that doesn't have a central tendency. It doesn't have, you know, you're like, oh, so what's the average? You've got an Apple, you've got a Volkswagen, you've got a doorknob, and then you've got a shower curtain. I want you to take the dimensions of their depth and then, I don't know, see if it's going up or down. I don't know.
So I have a lot of words floating around in my head, and these words I'm about to say are either going to be something that you think is interesting and fun, or be confusing. But do you ever use the terminology etic and emic perspective in the conversations or in your understanding?
I'm thinking, so the answer is no, but I'm thinking keep going. I think there's I think
So it's
there's
it's a frame
clarity
it's a
here.
frame from sociology, or kind of like anthropology,
Mhm.
when you're talking about studying tribes or different kind of groups of people. The one is the in-group perspective, and the other is the outsider perceiving. So
Oh, okay. I see. I
so
see.
that
Yeah. Yeah.
there's some interesting threads maybe to pull on there.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah. That sounds, what I thought you were going for was a contrast between phenotype and genotype perspectives on a particular phenomena, and so it sounds like it's not the
So
same thing, but
it's usually
it's not
used in this
unrelated.
context where you're kind of like the researcher from some Western university, and you're
Mhm.
you're observing tribesmen and kind of like Aboriginal people,
Right.
and the story that you construct from their stories might be somewhat different for obvious reasons from their own understanding of the
Oh, yeah,
story.
yeah, absolutely. So the short answer is we don't have to deal with any of that. And the reason for that is incident analysis is always and has to be grounded in the case, a case. Even in facilitating group review meetings, where analysts will present a group or some themes that they've been able to synthesize from data that came from not them, right? The synthesis is theirs, that generate these supported themes by data that came from what they're studying. And participants sometimes will like edge into, well, at Acme Corp, everybody knows we've got a culture of blah 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 blah, which is fine. That happens. The facilitator 101 move is to redirect. Okay, can you tell us how that is? There something that about what you're saying that played out in this case? So that's the benefit of incident analysis, is that you're not studying like you might in an ethnography, or similar types of
What
studies.
triggered it in my head was not necessarily you or the
Mhm.
facilitator. It was this separation that you described between the manager that's 10,000 feet away, and then the kind of on
Oh
the
yeah,
firefighters.
yeah, I see what you're saying. Yeah, the
Here's another word that's in my head, and I think it's related to a bunch of these themes. And I'll just throw it out there and then see where it goes. Is inattentional blindness.
Sure. Great, Daniel Gopher, super, great. Um, what would
So, I mean, is
what
that like, for the listening audience who's not familiar? It's basically that when we get super focused on one or two things, I think it's also related to my love-hate relationship with metrics. When we get super focused on a certain thing, or we have a very strong model of what that thing could be or should be, we don't see these obvious things right in front of us.
Right, right. Um, and like, what's an example? Let me. What's an example that comes to mind in the? Are you talking about
Well, so
sharp
the
end
example you
in?
see, if you start searching for this, you'll find these videos where they'll say that they'll have like a bunch of people in like the black and white uniforms or whatever, and they'll throw a
Yes, yes,
basketball, and they'll say count the number of basketball passes, and
yes,
then
yes.
they'll go on for however long, a minute or something, and then they'll get the end, and the question is not how many passes, but did you see the moonwalking bear?
Moonwalking
Yeah,
bear.
or grill
Yes.
or whatever.
So
Uh,
in that in the connection that you made from our conversation, were you thinking that the person observing it would be a manager, or would it be somebody who's responding to an incident? Because I could see
I think
those.
I think both of those happened,
Okay.
right? In the
Yeah.
because there's some, so there's the incident and the kind of hydraulic pressure, cognitive pressure, whatever,
Mm-hmm.
and you have this mental model, and you're trying to do troubleshooting with that mental model that you have,
Mm-hmm.
and it might keep you from seeing things that are right in front of you. But
Mm-hmm.
then I also think there's potential for that facilitation role, who kind of maybe, I mean, I think it goes back to the point you were
Oh
making,
yeah,
where
I see.
where,
Yeah.
where it's hard for us to not project our own models onto
Well,
students.
so here's the part, right? An analysis, by the time you get to a group review meeting, remember, you're presenting, it's your framing. There are analytical choices that you're making, but those are choices that are informed by the people who were there. It's why it's really critical for the people analyzing a case to not also have been responders to that case. And so corroboration is the greatest way to make sure that you don't get anybody wanting to talk to you in the future or go to any group review meeting that you're facilitating, is to be perceived to have an agenda. Because like, oh yeah, well, oh yeah, oh, are you going to go to the group review meeting? Like, oh, who's facilitating it? Oh, it's Andrew Schaefer. Well, no, I'm not going there, because
That
every
guy.
time he's just like, oh, we got to migrate to FreeBSD. Just won't shut up about it. Guess what? Big surprise. Spoiler. He's going to say, well, if we had FreeBSD, this wouldn't happen. Blah 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 blah. So you're not having an agenda, which also means that analysts ought not to propose remediation or after action sort of tasks. The people who are responsible will do that, even if you try to prevent them from doing it, you can't, right? So that's fine. But what you're looking for is to construct the richest understanding of an incident and represent it for the broadest possible audience.
So what scenarios coming in my head, knowing how a lot of organizations have politics and people do have agendas.
Mm-hmm.
What advice do you have for people to be able to adopt this practice with internal facilitation? Or do you kind of always, how do you get that objective third party facilitation inside of an organization?
Well, you don't. So little nitpick, I would say that there isn't anything such thing as objective. That's fine. But skipping over that.
Objective-ish.
Objective-ish. Let's say instead neutral and independent.
Agenda free.
Agenda free. That works.
Or agendaless.
The people who have the people who have the critical information, their narratives, what was difficult for them, what was surprising, what was typical or atypical for them in the incident. The most important part is for them to feel confident that what they tell you is confidential. It's just you, the analyst, having a chat with one of the responders, and the responder needs to have confidence that not only are you not looking for anything except for your story, for their story, period. Whatever you would like to say and describe and focus on is exactly what me as an analyst,
I'll reframe it through the lens of what the example you used is. How do you avoid the facilitators becoming the BSD person
because you're not answering anything. You're asking, tell me what happened here.
I get the ideal. I'm talking about
no, that's not the ideal. I mean, it is the ideal when we're coaching. When we do the incident analysis coaching project, one of us will ride shotgun and we'll help the person prep for the interview. And by the way, we don't call it an interview, even though it's an interview. You are an enthusiastic, curious person who wants to know what the experience was like, and you're like, tell me what happened. Then what? And then what? And then, all of the cognitive
The
interviewing
reason I use the
techniques.
word ideal, and
Yeah.
having my own kind of trials and tribulations trying to help organizations change their behavior is, Hawthorne effect or whatever you want to call it, that when the coaches or the experts are available in the room riding shotgun, then the behavior is one thing. And then when they're not, you might be deviate from that.
It can be. And in organizations who are starting to do this, they have to do a lot of work.
That's my question is like, what's the work that you need to do to try
so corroboration is incredibly important. After I've talked with you and let's say you let me record it and I've transcribed it, or I'm taking notes, I'm going to write down somewhere what I thought, how I understood what you told me. And I'm going to ask you, and only you, did I get this right? Please help me. Is there something, would you add something? What did I get this wrong? Let me know. Well, I want to make sure I get this right, because this is the critical part, right? It's not like, oh, you told me, and then like, whatever. And then I need to demonstrate that's very easy, that I'm not willing to disclose that I interviewed you. I'm going to say that we spoke with people, but I'm not going to. If you want to say, oh yeah, then John interviewed, but in subsequent interviews, I'm not going to refer to anything that you said. If you say, the issue was Postgres here, and I knew that was very, very clear, and I think pretty sure everybody knew that. And then I talked to Adam Jacob, because he was also a responder, and Adam is like, well, first, let me tell you, the wild thing is that I thought maybe the database was an issue, but Postgres was fine. It had nothing to do with it. It was the load balancer and its interaction with Memcache, blah, 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 blah. So now I have a disagreement as an interviewer. Disagreements are data. I'm not there to resolve a disagreement. I'm there to highlight. Now, is that disagreement? You thought Postgres was critically involved, and Adam does not, but thinks this other thing. Is that salient? Is that difference salient enough to the bigger picture of the incident? Maybe, maybe not. But I'm not going to correct you. And so once you get to a group review meeting, people who have been interviewed see analysts present a narrative. They can see how the analysts got that narrative, by the way, because they've already been asked. If I ask you, I want to make sure I get this right. Can you get this? Will you take a look at this? And you say, oh yeah, you get this right. There's a little bit of detail here, but pretty much all blah, blah, blah. Guess what? Now you're a co-conspirator. And you'll root for, and then that gets out of the way a whole bunch of stuff. Ideally, wouldn't it be amazing if in the group review meeting, somebody says, hold on a second, I don't know about that. Wait a minute, does that work the way it is? And I'm not going to say, well, Andrew, what did you tell us? Yeah.
We kind of plowed forward without this, but I feel like it would be beneficial to have this kind of like structural understanding of this process you're describing, right? So it's like there's this interview and then the review meeting. So what's kind of that procedural structural thing that happens for the incident analysis?
It depends. I mean,
Perfect answer.
I mean, here's the thing. If I thought it was a recipe that you could simply follow, then years ago, we would have put that together. We do talk about it in a number of conference talks and blog posts. It's not a sort of a big secret. I gave a talk at Spotify that's on YouTube, where sort of walk through a notional and sort of opinionated, as what we would say, we sort of lay our cards on the table. And it can be helpful, certainly a good start, but it's a little bit like, can you just tell me how to build a real-time, eventually consistent distributed database? Just give me the 2-slide version, right? It's a little bit like that.
Build your golden path platform to your utopian dreams.
Yeah, and so think about it this way. There's an analogy
But at the
that will
same
work
time,
for
like
you.
we would, again, just for the sake of the listeners, right? Like there's kind of like some things you've already identified that you're going to have these interviews with facilitators, and then there's going to be this review. And like, would you not have those same kind of events in your stream, or?
No, those would be pretty common. How
Yeah.
you do them, it matters greatly. So it's a little bit, the analogy that might work is there might be similar structure to continuous deployment. Those two words imply a number of things.
Yeah.
And they may vary, and they will vary in all sorts of ways. I mean, they vary enough that Jez managed to get a full book out of it. So yeah. So that's, I mean, the one thing that I wanted to just point out is that I don't believe, here's what I want when my kids are grown up. I have 2 teenagers. I want this stuff that we're talking about to be seen just as like a part of software engineering, right? Andrew, you're old enough to remember a time when version control wasn't really a thing, right? When integration testing wasn't really a thing. And these are things when code review wasn't even a thing.
I still talk to people where that's true sometimes. So
well, but it's vanishingly, it's going away anyway. And so code review also was like, it's a separate thing. Have you tried this code review thing? And there's blah, 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 blah. Now it's just like, oh, is it separate? This is just called software engineering. And that's what I'm hoping. That's the goal, I think.
So with that, there's starting to be a lot of conversations. There was just this conference,
yes,
learning from incidents, and related to this, like you just used this example of code review, and code review was never really a new thing. I think code reviews happened from the beginning of time. The 19th.
I think you're right.
So there's like these recurring themes, or we were talking about this before. The song remains the same, but I would like to get your perspective on how that kind of community is coming together, what's interesting and novel, and then what's kind of related and connected to the same conversations that we had at Velocity in Mountain View, or
yeah. I mean, so as you say, like this community, let's call it LFI, RE, resilience engineering, human factors, cognitive systems engineering, curious crowd is growing and growing and growing, just like DevOps crowd did at those early days and still are. This feels very much like that 2009, 2010, 11 timeframe, where, I mean, I don't have to say more of it. It was a time of foment, I think is the word. It was sort of an explosion of enthusiastic, hands-on practitioner communities. I mean, the Velocity Conference of itself was a result of that. And so that's exciting. What I really like, and I didn't have a handle on this until Woods made it very clear to me. Resilience engineering is a 20-year-old field. Bunch of domains have been studied, and like trying to understand, okay, what is resilience? Where does it come from? How could you identify it? And we got to do that before we could do any engineering of it. And the thing that I have an appreciation for is we've got so many degrees of freedom in our software world that don't exist. And sometimes they're almost so invisibly, a given, right? But and I wrote a chapter in Steve Sherrock's Human Factors in Practice book about this. But challenges in those other domains just are not even a thing. It's not that we don't have challenges, we do, but they're very different than in medicine or intelligence or power plants or transportation. And so the idea this in June, the 10th resilience engineering symposium is happening in the south of France. I've been to the last 4 of them. They're every other year, and more people from software show up. I can tell you right now, when I was writing blog posts in 2010, when I emailed Richard Cook, when I had never known him, it's like, this paper is blowing my mind. What's going on? I had no idea. If not in my wildest dreams would I expect that people would see what I see and keep going. And so along with other things that it's quite clear that the world of software, and I'm being really general, the Papers We Love conference, well, so much for you guys are too academic. Bullshit. You guys are too academic. Now, let's get back to why Lamport clocks are not going to work because of blah, 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 blah. What do you, right? So yeah, that's what I'm really excited about. And I will tell you this, it's happening. And much like you mentioned the conference, when Paul Hammond and I went and gave our talk in Velocity in 2009, we were just like, we just want to tell you what we've been doing. And this is like, and we were just a little like, oh, we just do what we're doing. And it's not we were ignorant, but we were kind of like, maybe this is just not that, maybe it's kind of interesting and novel, but not like, oh my God. Certainly not for people to call me a lunatic, which happened. They did. And Paul, but the conference in February, I had an opportunity. All of our clients have us sign NDAs for obvious reasons. Indeed.com, who's one of our clients, and our exemplar client, relieved us for that because we were so excited to talk. And so that's what that talk is, a stake in the ground. It is, I think the title is What Good Looks Like, or demonstrating what good looks like. It is a 10 plus deploys a day. This is a demonstration. We can talk about whether it will work with you, but we don't have, we are not talking about whether it's possible, because the fact is it is.
The existence proof.
It is the existence proof. And I'll tell you right now, I cannot say enough good things about what Jason Copy and Alex Ellman have done at Indeed. They are, they have demonstrated what good looks like and what the future looks like.
So I have a quick comment, and then I want to get back to kind of some themes that you built on. So the comment in, me and Jabe sit and trade papers all the time now, and it's like socio-technical systems goes back to the 50s.
Oh,
and
yeah.
There's just like all these crazy things that people figured out over and over again that we're still not really taking full advantage of in those bodies of knowledge. And then the thing I want to come back to and kind of connect it full circle is going back to the velocity talk, the DevOps thing, and this notion of whatever DevOps is and how it's evolved. At the time, in many ways, that's what good looked like, or that's what like the future, right? The future is not evenly distributed looks like. Mm-hmm. So my question to kind of get to the end of this is, at that point, and obviously you're evolved in your understanding and probably your theory and practice, but one, do you believe at the stage in the Flickr days that you were learning from incidents? And two, do you think that anyone has any hope in whatever, whatever version of the afterlife you want to not believe in, to be successful with dev and ops if you're not learning from incidents?
Yeah. Okay. So this answer, thank you. This answer is going to sound like a dodge, but it's not. The fact of the matter is, all organizations are learning from incidents. Learning is an innate human activity that is ongoing from the day you're born. It's not that learning is happening or not happening. It's whether or not it's the quality and breadth of what you're learning. Did I believe that we were learning from incidents? I don't even think I even thought about it at the time. And I think that that's okay. But what I now know is what makes me wonder, how much did we leave on the table? Right? That could have, how much better could we adapt to surprises and disturbances because of milking these, sometimes traumatic and surprising events for all that it's worth. Richard had said that you could think of incidents as unplanned investments. Your job is to get the greatest return on that investment. And so learning is happening. The question is, what's the quality? What is left?
This might be,
it's mostly in spite of the typical ways that people think learning is about.
Yeah. So this is a bit maybe of a semantic distinction. And I spent a lot of time thinking about learning and organizational learning in particular.
Yeah.
And definitionally, I would say that you didn't learn until you change your behavior.
Oh, yeah. But the behaviors changed all the time, because how do you explain all the incidents that you don't have?
But it goes back to this question that you posed, or the statement you made about quality, the quality of learning. To what extent does your organization have the capacity to take new information and turn it into improvements in behaviors?
Sure.
And that's definitely an unsolved problem in a lot of organizations.
But and what resilience engineering would tell you is that success happens all of the time. And that success comes from experience. And experience comes from not being successful. Right? And so there has to be
enough success, or you would not exist as an organization.
Exactly. Yeah. And so if you can, if you believe the idea, and I think I do at a high level, if you can adapt and learn faster than your competitors, you're going to be in better shape than them.
Learning is the only sustainable advantage.
Exactly.
So I feel like we had a pretty good chat for the better part of an hour. I would love to sit and do it for longer.
And Andrew, I would be happy. I don't think anybody else would be, but I would be happy to just to continue to jam with you for like hours and hours and hours. We have in the past, and we will in the future, but maybe we keep it.
I know you have to talk to one of our other friends in a minute, so I'll at least be courteous for that commitment. And with that, again, thank you for coming. And if you have any parting words or anything else you want to say, I'll let you say it right now.
Thank you, Andrew. I appreciate it.
Thank you, John.